All right, it's time. I'm going mute and I'll start the webinar.
All righty. Evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll give a few moments and let everybody sort out their connection and join us this evening. Again, evening, everybody. Looks like we're going to have a good crowd tonight. Thanks for joining us. All right. We're still waiting as folks might join us, but I'm not seeing the number edge up anymore, so we might go ahead and start. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be doing the preservation basics. I think that was in the Engage brochure as Papers in the Attic. That was the old name, but same course. We're going to learn how to preserve old documents and photographs. Basically, just some of the basics. Make sure my page turner works. There we go. So it works. Thanks for joining us. My name is Trey, and joined with our chat moderator is Meredith. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and let us know, and we can answer them in turn. And we will jump into it. So, why do you want to preserve your documents and your family legacy, your family archives, if you will? Why? That's a good question that a lot of folks ask. Well, you might want to add to your family archives for future generations. You're the keeper of this set of information. You can evaluate what might be important for future family that would find of interest. You may want to tell a story of your family. So you want to preserve some of the primary resources or some of the photos, negatives and whatnot, to help tell your family story. Your family story might also be entwined in part of telling the story of your community. That's also a possibility and of interest to some. Your family treasures, even some of the most innocuous little pieces, might actually tell part of the community story. So you never know what you might have and what hidden treasures might be there that not only tells your family story but also a part of the community's history. And it just provides a proof of an event or explanation for an event, why something happened, maybe. That's kind of the why. So what you might find as you're going through your papers in the attic, papers in the garage. We don't really have many basements here, so um, more than likely they're in the attic or in the garage. So what you might find, you might have any number of things, sentimental treasures, just items, letters, postcards, what have you, that are of sentimental value to you, or might be of hand-me-down sentimental value to the family as a whole. They might be historical documents. So yes, they're your birth certificates or your marriage certificates, but that's also kind of you can look at it as a historical document, because as you're researching and doing your genealogy research with family, that's one of the things you look for to document. You might have legal and financial documents that can also form a basis of your family archive, something you might have. Provide proof of events. You may have receipts or tickets of something that you attended, or trips and travel that you have done or that family members have done. You may have photographs, which many folks do. You may have some physical photographs. Um, Probably more recent decades, we're less likely to print photographs, so we might have the electronic photographs on our devices or our computers and hard drives and whatnot, and fewer physical um, examples. You may also have items of clothing or toys that, again, that sentimental treasure, but also kind of family treasures. Um, you never know what other little bits and bobs you might have. And the idea is this IDOM. You want to identify. You've got to find them. You need to identify what you might have, what you might like to preserve, say for future generations of the family. So you need to identify, you need to find them. And once you have found and gathered your pile of items, you need to decide what's important to keep. Not every little thing is important to keep. And I think we've all got piles that we just at the time we set aside and go, nah, this might want to keep this, might not. But ultimately, at some point, we're going to have to decide what's important to keep, what tells that story, what story do you want to tell? And then we need to organize. So we need to organize, sort by the type of format, photographs together, documents together, any books, scrapbooks, um, anything like that. Keep that together, and you can also, a possibility is you can sort by the who, what, where, when, or you can sort by year, location, the person, and then it's important to label. Um, you can make a list, kind of make an inventory, if you will, and then label and identify uh, best that you can as you're going through and organizing. Who's in the photo, what does this represent, when, the who, what, when, where, and then, oops, keyboard mishap. And you want to make copies. So as you're going through the process, you may want to digitize. You may want to scan and save on a DVD, which is not an archival format, but it's easily accessible as you want a working copy that's easy to exchange with family and friends. A USB, external hard drive, any number of those options that you can give to friends and family that may have an interest, or who is helping you work on the project and helping identify um, what what family members or what persons or time period may be in a photograph, or what does a document or set of documents referring to, especially if it's something that you were not either born yet to to know about, or something that might need help. But an important thing to do is to first stop, get them out of the attic or the garage. Because if you are really, truly serious about preserving something for the future, if it's important to keep, please get them out of the attic, get them out of the garage. Worst environments for long-term preservation of items if you want them to last. And in Texas, I've got some lesser items that we've stored in the garage, and just the Texas summers and the Texas cold and that constant back and forth change of environments have absolutely destroyed things in no time at all. So we don't want that to happen to our precious letters and postcards or photographs and negatives. So when we're talking about preserving your family archives, you definitely want to control your storage environment. That's the single most important thing that you can do to help preserve your collection. So maybe not as this photo shows, cram, shove, wedge items into any available bookcase. That's probably not helpful for some historic documents. So in controlling your environment, that's what really helps. And not that you need to go to a great expense to have something neat like these storage boxes. It helps. You can go that route. It can be a pricey route. I'll say that up front because I've bought an order of some archival boxes similar to these recently, and they are not cheap. But it's something that long overdue for me to do for some of my own um, family photographs and negatives and get them all sorted and organized. So you may ask, so how do you preserve your archive? That's environment's important. So controlling the temperature, humidity, how much light, how much dirt and dust is in the environment are all crucial. Using the right type of enclosures, like that example of that photograph with those nice kind of a gray boxes, archival boxes, um, using something acid-free, um, of a good quality, a good clean box, rather than rescuing a box out of the dumpster and repurposing a cardboard box. That's where probably a lot of us started, when we were kids, because it was handy keeping your treasures in. But as we get more precious treasures of family photos and family documents over the years, a cardboard box, plain cardboard box is terrible. Not a great environment. Part of preserving your archive is to be careful and limit how many times or how often you handle the material. That's one of the benefits, and we'll talk about later, of digitization of your collection items. If you make a digital copy, you can refer back to that as many times as you need, and you're not having to handle a fragile turn of the century letter or a fragile scrapbook quite as many times to go back and research details and make notes and things. So careful and limited handling. And that's, like I said, your digital copies, you can use those instead of the originals. So you can keep your originals safely um, tucked away in a good environment that's away from light and dirt and dust. And just the possibility that you might physically damage the items as you're thumbing through the scrapbook and turning the pages. Pages get brittle, paper gets brittle, right? Um, all of that, you may not intend to damage something, but you can have an oopsie. But this little graphic here to the right is a great kind of little guide. It comes from the Texas Archive of the Moving Image, and while they're principally concerned with moving images, this has a lot of validity for a lot of other types of materials, still photographs, negatives, as well as documents and other papers. Definitely want them out in the attic. You probably don't want to store them in the bathroom. Don't want them in the garage. You don't want them under a sink somewhere where um, sink plumbing could back up or pipes rupture. And now you have the added heartache of now you've got water damage or complete destruction of something. Same way you really wouldn't want to store it in a I guess that's a crawl space of a basement. And like I said, we don't really have many basements in Texas, um, or immediately next to a washer and dryer. Kind of the same reasons. You have potential water damage, and high dust environments in those locations. So storage conditions. One of the things to remember is that heat accelerates deterioration. So the warmer for the longer duration that you have, that really speeds up how much decay happens in a lot of different materials. And humidity also can contribute to that. Very high humidity, more than 65%, that provides um, a lot of problem areas, from either creating an environment for mold to grow on items, or if you're talking about photographic materials, either prints or negatives, you have the softening and swelling of the emulsion. Um, that's your image on the substrate or the paper of the photograph. But just like too high of humidity, too low humidity can also be a problem. So that can lead to drying out and making materials more brittle. It increases the static electricity, which for magnetic media, the old cassette tapes or reel-to-reel tapes or any kind of early VHS type tapes, where you might have captured some family moments on those, that increased static electricity can actually degrade that recorded media, sometimes fairly badly. Um, the quality will not be great. Be very staticky and not staticky, um, kind of grainy, and you'll just have loss of quality of the sound and image. So an ideal environment is a good constant 70 degrees, 7 degrees Fahrenheit, that is, and humidity basically between 30 and 50%. Probably in some places, really a good steady 50, 55% is probably a good average. I don't know, our little image here doesn't show it, but it's kind of hard to get a thermometer to cooperate and show a nice 70 degrees sometimes. It wasn't cooperating. But just because it's a few degrees difference, don't worry. Ideal is a nice constant 70 degrees, but you can vary 65 to 75, just as long as you're not like stuff in the garage where you're going from 10 degrees, 20 degrees for a period of the year to 120 or plus, more than 120 if you're in the attic. Um, that's those extremes are bad. All right. So one of the things I mentioned was about avoiding light. So in your storage conditions, or if you have things on display, um, consider the light, the ultraviolet light, the UV light. Those can be damaging in a whole lot of different things. It can weaken the paper, the physical paper of letters or documents. It can bleach out the inks or the dyes, in an example here, the color photograph. It'll cause them to fade and change over time. And that damage is irreversible. It builds up over time and you cannot reverse it. So this image that's faded out here in this example, you can't reclaim that. Not really. You can probably have um, somebody scan and do some little bit of tweaking and kind of bring it back somewhat to its former glory, but it's going to be time consuming. It could be costly, and it's best to avoid it to begin with, if at all possible, to save what you can, because it's really ultimately the item itself. Once it's damaged like that, it's not reversible. Sunlight and fluorescent lights are the most damaging. Sunlight, of course, has high UV. Fluorescent lights give off a lot of UV. Now, I guess you could say, luckily, from a preservation side of things, uh, LED lighting, for the most part, has relatively low UV, depending on the maker, manufacturer, the specs on the lighting bulbs. But LED is not nearly as bad as the old incandescent bulbs or the fluorescent or good old fashioned sunlight. And since largely incandescent bulbs are not easily obtainable anymore, you don't have to worry about them raising the temperature within a room. So you got something on display, or you have things framed on the wall, and you've got track lighting or something directing. With incandescent bulbs, you can increase the temperature on something. And again, with the LED, it's luckily they don't give off nearly as much heat as the old incandescent bulbs do. So that's kind of an added bonus on two fronts there with the LED lighting. Now with dirt and dust, if you have something that's maybe out on display that's not protected by glass or something, you can have any of that dust and debris that accumulates naturally, depending on where it's located within the home. Those can actually get embedded in the paper or in the fabrics of so it's textiles, and those can get into surfaces and they can be abrasive. They can scratch, and if it's an acidic debris, some particles of something, and then combine that with a little higher humidity, some moisture in the air, that can create a different kind of chemical reaction and deterioration of what you wish to protect. And of course, dirt and dust can attract insects or mold spores. Kind of gives it a growth media, and that's also something we want to avoid. So controlling the environment, honestly, just simple, regular housekeeping, using air filters, good air filters for around the house to help cut down on dust, using window screens. We have pets, so we don't ever open the windows because that's asking for trouble with our critters. They'll just go poof and probably bad. So we never open our windows. But using window screens, use low wattage bulbs with dimmers. Again, with the LED, not quite as bad as in the past with the incandescent lighting or fluorescent lighting. And if you do want to display something, by all means do so, but rotate the displays. Don't leave it out for 10, 15 years. There's one of the things you think about it is kind of like a museum. They rotate exhibits for that very reason. They'll put something out on exhibit for a short duration, and they'll change it out, exchange it for something else. Or if it's a long-term exhibit, if it's a book, they may turn the page. So that set of pages is not exposed for the duration of the exhibit or for the full duration. They'll limit the exposure and turn the page. If possible, sometimes it may be preferable to display copies and store the originals, especially if something is really, really fragile. You may want a digital copy, facsimile, if you will, and display that one. And then you have electronic files, so it doesn't matter how long you keep that. If it gets damaged or grungy, swap it out, make another copy. Just avoid storing items in basements, attics, and garages. Please, please, please. If at all possible, best place is around the center of your home. That way the temperature and humidity are more stable towards the center. That's hard to do, admittedly. And the way our house is configured, I can't do this because there is no storage closet or storage area, storage room on the center of the home. It's kind of around a central spot of chimney, hallways, and bathrooms, kind of in the center of the house. So that's a hard one for me. Ideally, I would like to, but yes, I have to use an outside wall, which is not ideal. Um, Keeping good window seals and sealing the cracks and crevices for any kind of drafts or help change in temperature and keeps down the migration of dust and insects and things from outside to the inside. And if you have a rather damp area, you can always use a dehumidifier, or you can use the HVAC system to control your temperature and humidity a little bit, which I think probably already do that pretty well in Texas. And of course, keep hitting the keyboard, and then keeping your archives away from direct natural light. Keep it out of direct sunlight. Don't store it where you're going to always open a window and you're always going to have sunlight fall on that bookshelf. Um, that that would probably not be a great thing. And just be careful and limit handling your fragile items. Any questions so far? I've been kind of quickly going through this. Doesn't look like we do.
None at this
All right, thank you. All right, feel free to drop your question in the chat box if you have anything. All right, so what to do with your treasures? Well, please do not use adhesive tapes. Don't use, the brand name, not naming brands, but it's kind of like Xerox is now synonymous with any kind of photocopying. Don't scotch tape use scotch tape on your products, on your photographs. Please don't tape it back together. It might be better just put it into a sleeve to stabilize, and rather than trying to fix something with tape, as so many people in the past thought would be a good thing, understandably, but it's not. Um, Separate any kind of highly acidic items, um, especially like the newspaper clippings. You want to keep items like the newspaper clippings and other acidic type items away from items that haven't started to turn yellow or gotten brittle, because that acidic makeup of those items can, lack of a better word, not infect, but they can transfer and migrate onto other items that were stable, and they can now start having some issues, so that it can cause problems.
Hey, Trey, we've got a question
Oh,
for you.
certainly.
So we've got, what if the photos have tape on them already? Should I leave the tape on?
Yes, unless you're already a very experienced conservator and know all the tricks and tips, yes, it's probably best to just leave that be. Um, yeah, that is probably best. You're going to do more damage trying to remove something than just leave it alone. Try to, like a doctor, try to do no harm. Yeah, I see another question there, and we're going to get to some of that some of the digitization, a quick overview of that here in a moment. So that might answer your question. So we'll just hold that for a moment. Yeah, and you'll find where letters have been, family letters have been taken in and out of an envelope so many times and unfolded, and they've been taped in the crevices because they started to separate. Now that tape is yellowed and crumbly and gross. It happens. So there's no undoing that. Just like there's no undoing. There's a period in the, I guess, 80s, 90s, everybody loved to laminate stuff. And before that, I guess in the 60s and 70s, everybody decoupage stuff onto things. You can't undo that. So it's done. What's done is done. And just when you're looking through your items, just make sure your hands are clean and the area is clean and uncluttered, so you don't hang a letter on something and tear, or you don't transfer, you know, food stains or ink stains or, dirt something onto your items.
We also have a request for examples of acidic items.
Newspapers, highly acidic. And it's because the newspapers are printed on very cheap quality newsprint. That's why it's called newsprint. Very cheap quality mass-produced paper. And that process, um, it's just highly acidic. It's not intended to last. And the example of what makes it an example of the acidity is old newspapers turn yellow and they get brittle. That's the result of the acidic paper. It just constantly breaks down. There's no reversing that. It will go away to dust in time. But once it's underway and crumbly, there's no reversing. There's no help in that. All right. So for paper items, so what did we do? What are some of the things we can do? So with paper items, you can store them in a lignin-free file folder, and then you can put those in document boxes. You can separate the oversized documents and put those in a flat file box if you'd like, or they do sell larger folders that you can put small maps and things in, or up to newspaper and poster size. It's going to be a little bit more unwieldy in the house to have a flat file that large to keep that kind of stuff. But if you've got a lot of it, who knows, maybe you should consider it. Or in this example here, it's not listed here, but you could get some of these acid-free, the material is escaping me at the moment, polyester, these little clear sleeves. And you can get them from a lot of different resources. And if memory serves, I forgot to get it off the printer, in that handout, I think if memory serves, there's not endorsing the suppliers, but it's just kind of a number of different possible places where you can get archival supplies. And dare I say, you can get some off of Amazon, and even locally in the Container Store used to have some archival supplies. Not sure if they still carry those. But anyway, yeah, for paper items, that's some of the things that you could do to protect and preserve and stabilize. Or if you're really really die hard with it, I would use the clear sleeve that helps and protects from fingerprints and smudges and dirt from handling the original. And then I would put that into a file folder, and that just helps protect it a little bit more. Plus, it's going to be a little bit more expensive depending on how many of these pages you would have. So you'd have to kind of consider that when you're going through, just like we do for the library for our archives, is how many containers is it worth putting it in, and what's that expense? If it's just a handful of few things, sure, you might could afford that easily. But if you have a lot of stuff, then you might want to just consider a file folder and a larger, letter size box or legal size box, maybe. So for periodicals and pamphlets, so for magazines, any kind of historic magazines you may have, you could either store them individually in a folder, and you could put them in a filing cabinet, and that would be spine down. Now, I know on this previous slide, it was talking about removing the paper clips and staples from things. Just be careful on a number of things, because you could, if it's a fragile paper, the process of removing an old steel paper clip, because back in the day, you know, before the 80s maybe, staples were made out of steel and they rust. There weren't aluminum like they are now, or a less rusty option. You may do more damage trying to remove the staple than if you just left it be. Magazines, you're probably not wanting to remove the staples on these, but so you would put them spine down, because the more, if you put them spine up, that weight is going to be pulling on those pages over time. Gravity is going to be pulling on that, and they're going to pull and tear from around those center staples. So you just put them spine down. They'll rest on the spine, and they shouldn't pull apart. Or you can store them in a archival, flip top periodical box, kind of like this photo here on the slide. Now, photographs and negatives. This has a range of different things. And I know this looks like a lot of text. Don't panic. It's just a lot of detail. But photographs and negatives. So these enclosures should have passed. You'll see the photographic activity test. You see the PAT maybe on advertisement on a vendor's website or in a catalog. That just means it's passed this test, so it should be nice and archival. You want to avoid the plastic sleeves. There's a lot of different manufacturers, and there are some vinyl, or had been from even as recently as the 90s, and there may still be some out there that they're not archival. They're a vinyl. It's just not, they're not good. You're looking to avoid this, like at the bottom, the PVC, the polyvinyl chloride. And those because they kind of have a smell to them. So you give them a sniff test, and if they smell like a pool float or a pool raft, they're probably PVC, and that's not archival. That's not scientific, but it gives a good idea of that they may be PVC, the sniff test. But it's let's see, what is the polyethylene, and all the other types escape me. I should have made a list. Those are more archival and should be the ones that have passed the PAT test. The paper enclosures, like a folder or a paper envelope for photos or negatives, can be fine, just as long as they're archival paper envelopes and they're acid free. And if you have to mount them, or wish to mount them, I guess I should say, in a photo album, use those little mounting corners that don't glue the actual photograph to um, to the pages. If you're trying to preserve an old family album, you feel free to, try to preserve that intact. You can store it in boxes. And the reason I say intact is because a lot of the early photo albums, um, people actually physically glued the photos with paste, would paste the photos to it's almost like a construction paper type page, which that construction paper type page was very highly acidic. And so it may make the back of the photos start turning yellow or brown from the acid in the page in the paper. But you can't do anything about it because they're glued to the paper. So trying to remove them would do irreparable damage to the photo and or the page or both. So you probably want to try to keep them intact. In any kind of cased photos, you want to keep them in the original cases. And what I mean by that, if you've seen the old photos, and I wish I had an example here, I forgot about that. If you have the old tintype photos or the daguerreotype or glass plate positive or some old that you usually see, if you see them in the antique stores, they're black and white photos and they're in some sort of little clamshell holder. You want to keep those in the holder, even though the holder may be kind of coming apart. It's still providing a little protection to those photographs because those photograph emulsions are very, very fragile. And that's why one of the reasons they were placed in these cases was to protect them as much as to display them. Any broken glass plates, you want to just kind of wrap those and keep those separate so they don't cause any scratching or damage to anything else adjacent to it. And basically, the photographs themselves are really simple. They're a support paper. That's what the binder and the emulsions are put on. And if it's in color photographs, then you got the image dyes. And for a black and white negative, there are many, many layers of coating for the emulsion, coatings of the chemistry. Could be to the front and or back of the film's base material. And that light sensitive emulsion in black and white is silver. It's got silver content to it. And the color negatives kind of constructed the same way, except its emulsion has many different layers of colored dyes. That's the really basic explanation of it. And all of this can be damaged by either too high a temperature or too much light and humidity. Oh, here's my note. Mylar. Mylar is a type of polyester plastic. So that's a good material to keep your negatives or your photos in, or sheet protectors for your like letter pages and things like that. All right. So books and scrapbooks. Photo albums or books in fragile condition should be stored and boxed flat, if at all possible. And if you have something like one of those old photo albums with the very acidic pages or newsprint, very acidic newsprint affixed in them, I would interleave them with one of those Mylar sheets or something, just to keep it from further transferring more acid to something else within the scrapbook. And I wouldn't, probably not a good practice, just like you wouldn't try to force and pull things apart if they don't want to come apart, is don't re-glue or reaffix loose items. Just, you can document with notes where something might have come from, but don't re-glue it you might run into more possible hazards for the, passing it down to family and future generations. They're like, why did they do this? And you don't want to be like that. And just simply, scan and photocopy the pages for access purposes, so you don't continually handle and open and close something that's very, fragile. Like these examples look very, very crumbly and very flaky. So you could, as a course, you can use an archival box to keep those in, and you can shelve the small and medium size scrapbooks. You can really probably get away with shelving those between books of similar size, to prevent them from warping or distorting. And any scrapbooks with loose or detached covers, you could tie them with a flat cotton tape so they kind of stay together, and that helps reduce damage. Just be careful where the knot is placed to prevent, it making an indentation on the cover or doing more damage. And just, be careful with your handling, and shelve upright and supported. Any oversized things, just like we're talking about on the larger photos or sheets, oversized can lay flat. And yeah, so for audio visual media, now we're getting into something probably a lot more modern here. You've got everything from, the tape to the, hard disk. Probably most of us are probably more familiar more recently with the DVD type storage disk. Any kind of grooved or optical disc, hold that by the edges or the center hole. That's, what they're taught for CDs and DVDs, right? That's, don't get your fingerprints on the shiny mirrored finish of the disc. Any open reel or magnetic tape, hold that by the edges of the outer reel shell. Don't touch the tape itself on the spools. And similarly with the film, only hold that on the edges. So if you've got old 8mm, 16mm movie film, just hold that by the edges like you would in negatives for still photography. And all those formats would store upright, less chance of warping. And just keep your equipment clean and well maintained. If it's deteriorating and starting to, like in the case of maybe old 8mm, 16mm tape can get brittle. If it starts noticing noticeable deterioration, you might want to consult with, a specialist that's able to convert it and copy it to a new format, a new media that would help preserve that information for the future, because there's no reversing that kind of deterioration over time. And just simple framing and display options. This is just if you are going to display originals, just use 100% cotton mat mounting boards. Always use a window mat, something to give a little bit of buffer and protection from the original object, because you don't want it to be flush up against the glass that it could possibly stick onto the glass. Always use acid-free backing boards, and if you need to consult with an expert on something that you really want to display a very nice original, just there's a lot of options out there of folks you can talk to. And just like in your storage, if you're going to display it, try to display it on interior room where the interior is more stable. And, just don't display it. This is kind of some duh stuff, but just don't display it above or immediately adjacent to heat vents or radiators or fireplaces. Um, use copies for that maybe. And you can always use spacers between the frame and the wall, so you get a little bit of some ventilation behind the object. Just use a copy and store the original. Best advice. Now, any questions so far? No, doesn't look like it. All right, so I'm going to go through this one pretty fast. Um, the digitization and the scanning. So why digitize? We've already talked about a little bit about this, but you want to create digital copies for preservation. And by making the duplicates and storing the originals in a safe place, you reduce further damage from handling damage, right? And you can, with a lot of really simple tools, you can create a very high quality display print that in many cases may look exactly like the original, depending on what material you're working with. Of course, there's the caveat for that. But that'll, creating the digital copies, that'll help protect your, be it legal records, historically important records, your health and financial records, as well as your family photos and important things like that. And you do it because it's easier to share. You may have an original set of letters from one of your descendants from bygone era, and you just would like to share that with family. And it's easier to do if you digitize it, certainly, than running the risk of shipping an original through the mail or parcel service somewhere and run the risk of losing it forever. That would be bad, and it has happened. So kind of operate under what we call the locks system. Lots of copies keeps it safe. So for digitization, and there's a whole separate, we have a digitization basics class, and this is a quick run through of this. But digitization enables conversion of the physical items into something in the digital domain. So you have your physical family letters, your photographs, or your negatives, but you can't easily, well, you can't send them through an email. You can't save them to a flash drive and make copies and send them to family. But with digitizing, you get it in the digital domain, and then you're really able to share it easily, while at the same time protecting those fragile originals. But you need to develop a plan, figure out what scanning equipment you have access to or may need, figuring out the software that you have access to or may need to learn to use. And then you're going to store your digital files. So those are quick 4 areas we're going to look at. And this is one that trips up a lot of people. They freak out over the digitization. I don't know anything about digitization. It's basically a simple concept. You can make it as simple or as complicated as you want. And the first thing I really, really can stress is just sit down, make a plan, and create your workflow. And this is not the only model to use. This is just a quick, simple model just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about with the workflow. So you start out with your collection of documents and photographs in this example. And then you're going to decide, what is that collection? What is this called? oh, this is Aunt Betty's archive, whatever you want to call it. You create that name. That's how you're going to name or number the collection that you're going to be working on. And then you create your folders to organize your images. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. Create your folders, then you actually do your scanning, do your image editing if necessary. You're doing your software adjustments. And then you're saving your digital files to your folders that you created. And then you're creating what? Your backup, lots of copies, keeps it safe. And then it repeats. And as long as you follow the same workflow, just whatever works for you, just be consistent in it. Don't get confused and then you end up scanning something twice or not scanning something that you thought you scanned. Have a consistent process. If you've got it's simple as to your right is where you've got your unfinished materials, to the left your finished materials. It doesn't matter if you want to swap that around. What works for you, what works in your space, and keep a clean workspace so that you don't mix up what pieces go with what collection. No, sounds freakishly complicated. It's not. It's just be consistent. When I'm talking about setting up a folder system and naming this, let's talk from a realm of we're organizing. You're creating your folders to create your master archival files. Real simple. Your master set of images. So we're going to start here. We've got a folder. It's 1984. It's graduation pics. That's one of the collections we're working on. We've got a master folder. That's what I call her, Aunt Betsy. That's her collection. That could be that folder name. And within that folder, you got 1984 graduation. And then you've got the ceremony photographs. You've got the graduation dinner photographs. Those are in those folders. You got another folder where there was a 1984 family reunion and then a 1985 Texas vacation. All of that's within that structure. You can use descriptive names to help identify the files, but just keep it brief. Probably ideally briefer than this, but that's fine. Now, some things to keep in mind with the scanning: the type of material, the color space, resolution, and the file format. And bear with me, we're going to run through this and hopefully not confusing, but I will entertain questions at the end here. So you're looking at these spaces. You scan as a TIFF or PNG format for archival. A JPEG is good for general photo use. The documents can also be saved as a PDF. We get into more detail over this in the digitization basics, so I won't go into it here, but there's other things to consider. If you're scanning documents or photos that are generally 4.5 or 4x6 or 5x7 you can scan that at 300 DPI or PPI for general purposes, or do it 400 or 600 DPI if you plan to enlarge the photos into much larger size. And the DPI stands for dots per inch, or the PPI is pixels per inch. It kind of talks about the same thing. Just your software or your scanner might have settings for DPI or PPI. You'll see one or the other or both. You want to stay true to the original. Make sure to crop it properly maintain a little small border around the image that's not too close, not too wide. You don't want to crop in on the image. Like in this example here, we've got the entirety of that photo on that photo card scanned. We didn't just crop in on that rectangular part in the of the image. We got the text here of the photo studio that did that. That might be of historic significance to helping you find and research um, something about your ancestor or the family member depicted in the photo. Try to keep the tones normal in the same colors and tone range. All of those are important. So in the type of material, you've got a black and white photograph, you may have color slides, you may have color negative or color photograph. And you might have a two color space. So you may have a black and white, maybe it's a typed um, page, or you might have something that's in handwritten text, maybe, or a photo illustration or a photorealistic illustration or something in black and white. You probably would be scanning that in grayscale. Or if it's color, you probably be scanning it in the RGB for a color photograph or a color illustration or something like that.
Hey, Trey, we have a question.
Oh, sure.
We have, how do you keep the tones the same? The scanner at the library does it automatically.
Yeah. Um, yeah. That might be where that's always a challenge. In a publicly accessible um, environment like the scanner here in the library, who they don't reset and go back to zero each time between users. That can be a challenge. You just have to eyeball it. It's a little bit more pain in the tuchus. Um, yeah, but you might have to eyeball it, and you might have to if you're only can do a portion of the work at one time, you have to come back and do another portion. Um, maybe you could jot down what some of those settings were when you ended or started, and try to get close back to those settings before you do the next batch. The next time you come in, whether it's days or weeks later, and then you might have to kind of adjust and fudge it a little bit, give it a good eye, and maybe have to compare it with some images that you did the previous time, kind of as a benchmark. Um, I wish there was an easier way, but in this kind of environment, it's hard to do. If you had your own scanner, you would know your settings, and no one else came through and would adjust and mess around with the settings. Um, Unfortunately, that's just going to be a challenge in the library environment, unless when we get our hopefully updated scanner, the new software might allow for a little bit more, I don't know what to say, efficiency and consistency. Maybe we can hope. Okay, so an example here of bitonal. Here's a typewritten pages. That would be a bitonal from a scanning perspective. From a grayscale, you may run into it's a printed black and white photos. It may be a black and white film negative, or it may be a um, photographic and art illustration of something printed in a magazine. Um, that would be a grayscale because there's many different tones. It's not just black or white. It's got grays and a lot of different tones in it. So hence grayscale. Color, color photographs, color negatives, color transparencies, or this handwritten uh, note here on a slightly tan or yellow notepad. Um, Sometimes you would think, okay, I could just do that bitonal. It misses, sometimes the scanners miss some of the very light, faint. You could do that in grayscale and you might have success. But I've kind of liked if you're on a colored paper and you might have a colored pencil or you might have other notations on a letter or document and other colored inks. I want to capture that in color to so you can see there's differences. And sometimes, really and truly, more times than not, scanning a handwritten in document in color, you get to pick out a little bit more of that, how to say, the weight of the hand, of the penmanship or the pencil. Um, yeah, I find even with pencil, the color scan seems to pick up a little bit better. But that's just your mileage may vary. That's my preference. So when we're talking about resolution, more pixels equals higher resolution. And really and truly, I already mentioned the DPI, the dots per inch, or the PPI, the pixels per inch. Um, both of those are basically saying the more dots you have per inch, the finer the image. But it also makes a very much larger file. So the arrangement and composition of the pixels creates the image. And the more pixels, the dots in that space, the higher the resolution, right? So in this case, we've got an image on the left that was scanned at 72 ppi, pixels per inch. And you can see it's kind of blocky and kind of not grainy, but it's just kind of pixelated, digitally meh. But the one scanned at 600 ppi, you can see is a much clearer, much nicer photograph. It's much clearer, higher resolution. And many of the scanners that you will have access to, the ones here at the library or the ones you may purchase and have on your own, either um, a multifunction home office type thing that's a scanner slash printer. Um, its software probably will have settings, I'm sure of it, where you can um, adjust your resolution, adjust your DPI or your PPI, and you would just need to go in, know how to find those settings and adjustments and to suit what you need to do. The 600, like this photo, 600 ppi, you can enlarge that a good bit larger. And I guess a little anecdotally, why would you do that? It's, let's say you have a small wallet size, like a school picture, small wallet size. And yeah, you could scan that at, let's say, 300 DPI. And you're not going to really be able to scan it or enlarge it and print it much larger, more than likely without starting to lose some details. But if you scanned it at one of the higher DPIs or the PPI, you might be able to enlarge that at least on your monitor. Maybe you don't intend to print it large, but you're trying to see a little detail of the person, maybe what the person's holding, and it's like a small wallet size photo. The higher the DPI, the higher the resolution, you might be able to kind of cheat a little and enlarge it on the monitor and see what it is they're holding. Oh, that's the family dog from the 1930s that we read about in the diary. that matches the description, you might be able to see those details when you enlarge it that you can't really see in a small wallet size photo. That may be a stretch of an explanation, but it actually helps. My eyes aren't that great. Magnifying glass doesn't help all the time. So if you were able to scan it at high resolution and then zoom in on it, you might be able to pick out some details of something, which is kind of neat. And it works. As this example that I forgot about. So you're going to be able to kind of zoom in a little bit, enlarge in on that photo, and you can see a little more detail. Of course, you can see a lot more dirt and stains and cracks on the photographs, but very detailed. So the format, as I mentioned, your archival format is going to be the TIFF or the PNG, and anywhere a good average, depending on the size of the object, 400 to 600 PPI or DPI would be fine for your archival needs. And then a low resolution file, just your working file, whether you're just going to post that to a family blog online or post to social media or share with via email with family. Those formats, the JPEGs, the PDFs, those types of things would be easier to, smaller files, be easier to attach to emails and send. So anywhere from 75 to 200, 300 PPI is fine. Probably good around all around average is 300 for most standard photo snapshots or 8.5 by 11 letter page size. Just remember, the more pixels in the space, the higher the resolution. And when I mentioned that the archival format is a lot larger file size versus the low resolution, as an example, let's have an example of one color photograph. Say it's a 4x5 printed, or I guess I should say 4x6. One color photograph saved as a high resolution TIFF file could be anywhere between a 10 and a 25 megabyte file size. But if you save that as a low resolution, like I said, like you were going to post it on the web, send it an email, or smaller scale, small copy printing, that same photograph as the low resolution file might be, it'll be less than 10 megabyte. It might actually be less than 1 megabyte. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole out of curiosity, University of North Texas has some best practices on through their website. They've got a site on scanning standards, and they have kind of a little tutorial about scanning the different types of materials. Now, granted, this is taken from the context of a university archives, a lot different, more specific needs than what the average individual would probably work with for their home personal archive. So take that into account, but it gives some very good information and background on their standards and some of the whys that they do things, and then why certain things are scanned the way they are in the handling of those materials. And there's more preservation tips at the Texas State Library also on handling, historic materials and objects and things, which is a really good resource. So, are there any questions? If you don't have any now, you can always drop us a line at genealogy@plano.gov, and we will gladly follow up with you. And I needed to follow up with a question from earlier. Trying to run back and find. Yes, the recommended camera metapixels to take pictures, that's going to be whatever is within your budget. And it just, most modern digital cameras have really good capabilities. It just depends. Um, Also depends on what you're setting up to, how you're, what objects, is it letters, is it scrapbooks, what are you trying to digit, I can't talk. What is it you're trying to digitize? Because it may be something you may need a macro capable lens. It's not just the camera. You need a, how close can it focus? How small is the object that you're trying to digitize? Um, yeah, I'm not sure what scans. Yeah, it really depends. So that might be, for the person that asked that question, that might be a good one to follow up with us.
Trey, can you share the question out loud? Because it went just to us.
Oh, it did? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm sorry. The question was recommended camera metapixels to take pictures, recommended scan settings, 600 DPI in TIFF format, question mark. For me, the scans do not look good as the original photo. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that it just went to us and not everybody. My apologies. Um, so yeah, I've got more questions myself. So please reach out to us at genealogy@plano.gov. We may could book book a genealogy librarian, and one of us get to talk to you a little bit details, because I do have a question. I'm not sure the context on one part of it. So please reach out.
All right. And we're a bit over on time, but yeah, like Trey said, do reach out to us and we will get back to you.
But thank y'all for joining us tonight. Hope y'all got something out of that. Covering a lot of material in a short amount of time, but it's really not that complicated.
All right. Thank you all for joining us.